I always had a passion for business excellence. Most of them have been businesses that I've gone into that are struggling and acquired, and then run a turnaround on them, brought alignment of people, purpose and profit. The ideal last 10 years of my life would look like something like Warren Buffett. The reason that I got into supporting startups was I had a reasonable exit and decided I wanted to be a bit more philanthropic and try and support our young entrepreneurs, our young innovators.
A company that already existed and you had some expertise and a real interest in clean tech, and they had solved the problem or at least built the process to solve the problem, and then you felt like you'd be a great addition to the team and a great kind of founding CEO to take the company to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I'd offered to invest, and they needed somebody commercial to be able to balance the skills of a product and a tech person, and when it all looked too hard, and they were looking to return to the day jobs, I didn't want to let the opportunity fail, so I said, look, I'll get in there myself and CEO it for the first period of time just to get things established. I thought it was a really simple and really good idea. And having asked around, I found other people, felt the same way. Other environmentalists who didn't offset their flights were sceptical as to what the airline was doing with their money. So it had to be supported, it had to be done, and it was an important piece of, I guess, solving the world's challenges in enabling climate action that matters.
Right. And did you always know you wanted to be investing actively and running startups and being involved in startups? Was there a moment in your life where you decided that was for you? And kind of, I guess, on the scale of importance, where did the idea of things being commercial and making great financial outcomes be a thing? Where on the importance scale, how much of that was a driver also?
Yeah, effectively, I mean, business is business, whether you call it a startup or just a different stage of the same thing. I've, only started probably a few businesses myself. Most of them have been businesses that I've gone into that are struggling and acquired, and then run a turnaround on them, brought alignment of people, purpose and profit, and being able to on-sell them once they're up and going. So I've kind of gone in at a project management level to do a turnaround in the past. Startups, the reason that I got into supporting startups was I had a reasonable exit a while back and decided I wanted to be a bit more philanthropic and try and support our young entrepreneurs, our young innovators to get their products to market. And so I would jump on some of those boards and invest in some of them, and often both. Actually running them operationally is not what excites me. It's more the strategy and planning side of things, and also the exit opportunities for those founders, because of course usually that cash recycles into the next cycle of innovation, either from them or back into the community as well. So that's something that I'm quite passionate about, playing a community role there.
That's cool. Yeah. And when, I guess if you go all the way back to when you were at uni, then perhaps were you always really kind of passionate about strategy and that side of things, or did you kind of start off somewhere else in your training, and how did that impact your ability to then operate?
Yeah, I always had a passion for business excellence, I guess, and systems and processes were where I started off. So out of uni and out of my first kind of opportunity, I actually originally wanted to be a commercial pilot, and I found, I did all my licenses and got a job flying and so on, but I found the path to progression was really slow. But in that particular airline, they were really struggling for audit services. And it seemed these auditors held the airline by the short and curlies. So I thought, well, here's my leverage point. I can go and get my auditor qualifications and audit systems and processes, mainly safety systems, but also that led into business systems as well. And so that allowed me some leverage with the airlines. Originally, it was because I wanted leverage to be able to have, more flying opportunities and faster career progression. But actually, that led me to running an Auckland base for that airline, and running it as a business and splitting half the savings with them. So that was my first foray. Yeah, it was my first foray into actual business world. As an auditor, I was reporting directly to their board, so I was able to be an observer for the board meetings and learn more of the inner workings and their pain points. And I just had the idea. I said, look, I can solve some of these if you'll put your trust in me. I had to get a much older person on board as well as a business partner, because I was, 22 years old at the time. Wow. And they thought I didn't have enough grey hairs to run an Auckland base. But that was my first real business opportunity. I enjoyed that, and I found it easy to run the business far better than they were running it themselves, and make money along the way. So then that sort of, I guess, initiated my passion for business excellence. And, this is not rocket science. It's just following the rules consistently from all fronts. And that led from one business to the next, where I was able to sell them when they were running well, buy them when they're running poorly. And that created that wealth and the opportunities from there to go back and support more innovative startups, endeavors, which is treated more like a philanthropic gamble, really.
Yeah, I guess it is. But quite interesting that you were able to negotiate that profit savings commercial relationship in that auditing stage, because that gave you the opportunity to basically have skin in the game and get kind of paid real money that then you used, I imagine, to leverage, future business endeavors. So how did you approach that with them at the time?
At the time, I was reporting not only a safety culture issue, but also pointing to the inefficiencies and costs that they must be incurring by running the Auckland base so poorly. And I sort of said to them, look, I'm of one mind to offer to sort this for you, because I know how. And I'm telling you how, and you can do it. But if you don't want to do it, I'm here, available, and will drive 25% savings. I think I can do it for half, and we'll split the savings 50-50. So they were up for that challenge. They weren't doing well financially, and were looking for savings opportunities. I offered to do more of their auditing at no cost, just to help them out, because they were giving me this opportunity. So it was a bit of a sweetener for the deal for them. I made it difficult for them to say no. Right. Of course, I had to get the Auckland manager, who was in his 50s, to do it as a business partnership, so that they had somebody with a few years of experience on the ground there. And
did you share revenue with him too, or the savings with him too? Yeah.
Yep. We did it as a 50-50 venture, myself and this other guy. And again, it was an offer he couldn't refuse either. So
nice.
Yeah,
it's definitely an awesome and creative way to have, I guess, a relatively standard job, at least at the surface, by at one stage, but then turning it into a accountable, scalable, profit generating for yourself personally, but also for the business through kind of that ownership and that accountability, gave you the opportunity to have, I guess, a non-linear return from that effort, which is really cool. Nice. So how long did that take?
It was about probably, I started working for them doing auditing and some work on the ground for about 6 months before I got involved in the business, and then it was probably a 12-month journey from there that I was actually running that as the base.
And then after that, they'd made the savings and you were able to move on?
Actually, they went into liquidation after that, so I had to move on. And
did you manage to get paid?
No, not for
not for the savings.
No, I was left actually with quite a lot of debt because we were also doing the refueling, so we had fuel debt that we were on charging that we were personally liable for. So that was a bit of a learning exercise, but for the first, I guess, 9-10 months until they stopped paying their bills, it was highly profitable.
Right.
We were young and wasted too much of that instead of saving enough for a rainy day, so it was a valuable lesson, I guess. But certainly the business model works, the concept works. The airline was outcompeted by a taxpayer-funded airline bailout from their competitors.
Right.
And their competitor dumped capacity on their routes just to push them out of the market, which was quite sad. It wasn't really their fault. They're a good airline, but
right.
Unfair tactics funded by our taxpayers. You can't really compete with that.
No. Okay. It's cool that, I'm really intrigued by the ability to negotiate something quite novel so early on in your career. But then ultimately, it's a bigger beast that you had no real control over the obviously ultimate outcome, given the size and nature of the airline business being very difficult anyway. But kudos for negotiating that deal, because I think that is pretty impressive, especially given the experience you had at the time.
Or lack of it, yeah.
Yeah, true. I guess building on from that then, like, how long did it take you to kind of, I guess, move on from that after it kind of went into liquidation and dealing with that kind of setback, even though I imagine you learned an incredible amount?
Yeah, no, I was straight on to the next opportunity after that. I loved driving that business and driving it hard into, a complete turnaround from how it was performing prior. And highly profitable turnaround, other than not getting paid at the tail end of it. So I wanted to take those skills and then go and apply it to every other business that I saw that was just failing. So, of course, you can't do too much at the same time. I didn't have the resources to do more than I wanted to. So I went, to one business and then expanded that to a few, and then brought on other ventures along the way as well.
Oh, yeah, nice. Where to next then in terms of like your biggest learning experience? You talked a bit about an exit. What was that business in? What was the exit and how did it come about?
It was a mechanical engineering company, a 25-year-old mechanical engineering company with, not a lot of innovation, but basically servicing municipalities around New Zealand in the water treatment space. And that was a great business to be able to go in and disrupt, because that business and the competitors were all engineer-based or engineer-led mentality. There was very little entrepreneurship in there, and in fact, very little customer-driven decision-making going on. So it was quite easy to bring on board a real customer-centric model, or reverse the model around from what do we think the customer needs to what does the customer think the customer needs, and how do we deliver that better.
Oh,
and
cool.
ending up.
How did you get into it then? Like, how did you get in specifically?
I was doing some consulting for a friend who had asked me.
Right.
They wanted to do a management buyout, so I said I would help them out. But then everybody else pulled out. Everybody got cold feet on the management, and my sort of friend was the last man standing. He says, "Oh well, it looks like I can't do this because nobody else is in. Nobody wants to put their house on the line or take any risks, so I just forget about it." And I said, "Well, look, if you want, I'm quite happy to co-fund this with you. It's pretty bulletproof and it's a no-brainer." So we went 50-50 on it, and that was the most successful business turnaround that I've done. It was less than 2 years between entry to exit. It was we nearly tripled the revenue in that 2-year period. We 5x the profits in that period, and it was quite simple to do. And then we were planning on continuing that growth for another year, but there was a good exit opportunity and at a reasonable price. So I just said, "Well, look, that's a pretty quick win. Let's take it." So that was where that went.
Nice. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And then after that, you're kind of like a local activist investor, that goes into a distressed business and then takes over. Now, you've done it in the private space. When we think of activist investors, we often think in the public space where you can acquire shares over time. But you kind of have a knack for seeing inefficiencies, and then you also in that instance had an unfair advantage because you had been consulting, I guess, in the business. Is that right?
Yeah, it wasn't a paid consulting gig or anything like that. It was just a case of, I'd offer, and I often, mentor young founders and so on, and sometimes they'll come to me and say, "Look, are you interested in this opportunity?" And I'll say, "Oh, how can I say no?" So, yeah, totally. So sometimes it's just what you give sometimes comes back, and that was one of those cases, I guess.
What, given the and it's shifting gears a bit, do you want to? Was there any other story you wanted to tell? Because I noticed that you're about to follow on, or should we move on?
No, I was just going to say after that exit is when I thought I've probably done enough for a while. I can get into setting up a charity and just trying to help others now.
Okay,
and that's sort of the path that I headed towards.
Nice, that's cool. Do you? What are your? Firstly, we've gone a little bit of a tangent, and I've got some. I want to talk about the climate space, especially the climate space over the last couple of years. But I guess firstly, do you have any specific views on intergenerational wealth, and do you think about that a lot in terms of your own life, or not at all?
No, not really. I didn't get any handouts when I started, and I think it was for the better. And in fact, some of the businesses that I've been in when I've hit rock bottom has been, a good awakening and a good stimulation to reinvent those businesses, and that's been conducive to innovation that might not have otherwise happened. I think a struggle is good. Intergenerational wealth is, whilst it is always nice. I'd love to not have to have scraped the barrel so many times in my life. And good on those that don't have to, that have got some blessings. I think in some cases it can also create, over multiple generations, some inherent laziness, where the grandparents have worked hard to build something up, the next generation has maintained it, and then the third generation who haven't really seen the hard work go in because they're one separated.
They lose the context.
they tend to go in and blow it. Not all the time, but certainly in families where there's that ultra success, you often have a few challenges come with that sort of third generation of wealth.
That makes total sense. And like you say, it's kind of, you probably weren't alive or really aware of what was going on to really appreciate, obviously, how hard it is to kind of go through that experience, that mental acrobatics of actually going through failures or near failures, to appreciate, how hard it is, I guess. And yeah, we often talk about it on the podcast of it being a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you want to give people the best advantage, or your family the best advantage they can have, the best kind of start. And that obviously isn't just money. That's also teaching, learning about good morals, about trying to give good experiences, trying to let them take risks early so they can learn from them too. And if you kind of are handed everything, perhaps it's you're almost being robbed of the opportunity to go out there and do something meaningful. So yeah, that's kind of, interesting to think about. I guess also in New Zealand, succession is often done a bit too late, I've noticed. Succession, there isn't a clean handover. And then when the handover comes there, it might be too late. In a sense, if you're there to inherit an empire, you'd like to do it early so that you can, inheriting at 60, you're already past it, right? And it doesn't give you a chance to really have real ownership of something, because by the time you get it, you're kind of half in, half out, most likely. Or, it's a marathon life, but, you don't want to be starting to run the race hard at a late age, most likely. So with the, I guess, mimetic nature of the climate industry over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of investment into the climate space, and then almost a reversion to the mean from a sentiment perspective around climate projects. So there's less positive sentiment around these initiatives at the moment. Has that made the CarbonClick journey difficult? Like, how have you navigated that? Because it isn't potentially fundamental driven, it's potentially a kind of a sentiment driven view at the moment.
Yeah, very much. And it is, it depends, on the sentiment changes in different geographies at different times. We saw a huge movement in this direction a few years back in Queensland, where they had fires one year and then extreme floods the following year and so on, with a lot of deaths, a lot of house loss. And there was, strong movement there. But you give it a couple of years and people forget. And you have stronger sentiment elsewhere. You see now out of parts of Spain where you've just had the big floods in, was it Seville? But you see a lot of movement nationally in Spain, where they are very much at COP29. Spain was very present and very engaged, because they've just been through a time where they've had a big loss.
Right.
There's also market sentiment that comes with macroeconomic times, and so in a recession, it comes down to survival, and if people are struggling to put food on the table, they're not going to be offsetting their carbon footprint, and so on. And, they're not going to be picking the flexi flights. They're going to be picking the cheapest economy flights that they can to get from A to B if they do need to go somewhere. So you've got, you do have a sentiment issue that goes with it. There's also the challenge where carbon offsets in particular have come under the microscope, because there are some shoddy projects out there that are very questionable as to whether they should be entitled to receive carbon credits or not. And those stir up the market. They get a lot of attention from the media, and so that tars with the same brush the good projects, and there are really good projects out there as well. And then the other factor is that you've got some big corporates that and oil companies and so on that just buy these cheap, shoddy offsets and then do nothing to reduce their carbon footprint and say, oh, look, we're net zero now, or we're carbon neutral now. We're not going to do anything else because we're already at the peak. And you can't just offset your way to saving the climate. It's got to be a decarbonise or reduce first and offset second to really boost that impact.
It becomes a bit of a ticking the box then, maybe, if it's not done with the right intent, perhaps.
That's right. There's a lot of that, and that's the challenge that CarbonClick is trying to overcome. Is we audit and scope out really high quality projects, native reforestation, and so on, and that have a genuine, accurate measurement on the carbon footprint or a generous measurement in favour of those buying the carbon credits, and also has a lot of co-benefits that go with it, both social, biodiversity, and economically as well.
Yeah, that's cool. If someone was trying to make their way in, because I just find that clean tech, deep tech, these sort of areas are so hard. They're just so hard to get going. And there's a lot of money to get, there's a lot of funding required. It's not like, and I mean, I've experienced this somewhat in the fintech space, moving from, the gaming space originally. The gaming space was so easy and fast to get a product going, get it to market, get it to users and growing it. Whereas, in a more regulated space or a capital intensive space, it becomes so difficult to kind of get that momentum, get that ball rolling. Like, what would your advice be for someone trying to get into the space with the intention of starting something, I guess, later? And how would one approach an incremental and almost bootstrapped approach to getting into the space while perhaps working on another project?
Good question. And I think the answer is if it gives you a sense of purpose that you could be proud of. It's one of those things that, when you look back on life later on, it'll be the sort of thing that you're proud that you've had a crack at. And like any startup, you've got, sobering statistics where around 1 in 10 really succeed well. 1 in 10 kind of hover along, and the other 8 out of 10 generally fail. But unless you have 10 founders that want to progress with purpose and try their ideas out, you're not going to get that one that makes a huge difference to our planet exist. And so you've got to be brave. You've got to appreciate that you might fail, but go in with the best of intentions of success. And you'll need to have, investors behind you, or you'll need to be doing it with some level of funding behind you if you're bootstrapping, whether that's your own savings, whether that's a secondary job that you're doing. If you think you can do this on the side, a lot of people struggle to do two things well at the same time. Right. But I would say if you can get a decent investor to back your idea through the angel circuits and so on, give it a go. And if the idea doesn't have legs, you probably won't get the funding. So that's an early qualifier.
Yeah, and I guess the question also revolves around, in this space, how do you validate quickly and cost effectively to try and give yourself the best chance of success, right?
Yeah, and there are accelerators that you can participate in that specifically focus on this. Creative HQ and so on is just one example that I've just heard from in the last 48 hours. But there are plenty of accelerators around that you can try your ideas out. Most of the universities have an innovation accelerator as well. I would thoroughly recommend that you follow one of those programs and take on the advice from the mentors that come into those programs. not all the advice, but at least listen to it. I didn't listen to every bit of advice, and some of it was wrong, you know.
Yeah, totally. So if we were to like fast forward, what would, and I love this question. Someone asked, told us that this is what they asked their clients. He's a coach, a leadership coach. What do the last 10 years of your life look like in your head? Like, what would be the ideal, I guess, last 10 years of your life look like?
I guess it would, the ideal last 10 years of my life would look like something like Warren Buffett, you know, where he's in the process of giving back and undoing what he's done as far as, you know, finding those charities that he can benefit, finding those unprivileged schools to fund, and fix some of the problems in the world. So that, I mean, he's generated a lot of wealth without a lot of impact along the way. However, he's now using a lot of that wealth to create really positive impact for the world. I don't know how his kids will feel about him blowing all of their inheritance, but he's certainly.
They seem pretty keen on it, from what I've seen. They seem pretty happy with it.
The Jack Ma's of the world who have given everything away to charity, like not let their sons inherit $1. And, you know, I'd probably see the same for me. I'd like to figure out how I can accumulate wealth, impact along the way, but also then use that wealth to do some good along the world. I can't take it with me underground, right?
No, you can't. That's a cool perspective. You go. That's a really cool perspective. It's not often you hear about, that planning that and do it, and kind of having a pretty good sense of wanting to do that, or how you would achieve that. Because I guess achieving it's also would be quite a challenge. Making sure that you can give it away in time, that you've got the right projects. That will become a full-time gig. For at least 5 years, probably, when you eventually get there. That's awesome. Well, it's been really cool learning about your story, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on and giving us the time. I think that I really, really have enjoyed how you're kind of this activist investor that comes in and does turnarounds. I love that space. I find it extremely interesting. And
Thanks very much. So do I. Thanks, Charles.